All right, good afternoon or morning, everyone. It's 1:30 Eastern, and my name is Charles Vilmorin. I'm with Link Senior, and this is the third session of our Activity Strong Virtual Summit, where we aim to acknowledge, educate, and empower activity and life enrichment directors. And I'm extremely excited to introduce you to Kenny Bryant, Social Service Manager for Hermitage in Northern Virginia, and Kirsten Jacobs, Dementia and Wellness Education with Leading Age. Before we get started, for today's third session, I would like you to keep in mind just a few housekeeping reminders. One is, as part of the summit, you can earn up to 6 NAB, NCAP, and/or NCCDP CEUs. To earn these credits, you need to attend the full session, as few as 1 and as many as 6, and you need to fill out the required post-summit CEU survey, which will be emailed out to all attendees tonight, June 23rd, slightly after 6 p.m. Eastern Time. You need to fill out that survey before midnight on Friday, June 26th, and we will email you the certificates by email, obviously, on Wednesday, July 1st, right? The second aspect, the second housekeeping item is that we are recording these sessions, so you will be able to access them through our website and share them with your team or come back to it at any given time. The third aspect, which is important, as we've had quite a few questions, is that we are right now broadcasting this session through Zoom and Facebook Live. Now, in order to get your CEUs, the credit for your CEUs, you need to at least be logged into the Zoom platform, right? About the Zoom platform, given the high number of people, you can use both the chat and the Q&A features, but for the Q&A to the speakers, to the presenters, we would like you to use the Q&A as it is easier for us to manage. So with that, the last item I wanted to share with you, if you are participating in our bingo game, the word for this session is old. The word for this session is old. So with that, I'd like to introduce you again to two fantastic people that are going to help us understand the impact of COVID-19, looking at it from the lessons learned about dementia and cognitive change. So with that, I wanted to introduce you again to Kenny Bryant and Kirsten Jacobs. Both, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to switch. Sure, I'm going to switch to your slides, Kirsten and Kenya, and feel free to tell me if you cannot advance them. I'm happy to do it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's fun to witness the energy I see in the chat box and I saw on Facebook Live earlier when I jumped in for a little bit. So it's really a pleasure to be with all of you. I'm going to try to advance this slide. And Charles, I might have you do it. Oh, I think it's there. I think it's there. So this is our topic for our time together today. And I think there are lots of really lovely points of intersection between this topic and the presentations you've already heard and the presentations I know that you will enjoy later in the day. So I really invite you to let those topics cross-pollinate and inform each other. I think there's a lot of learning to be had in that space. Again.
This is my third attempt at trying to get a hold of you guys.
All right. So just to reinforce in case you missed it, your bingo word is old.
Thank you, Kirsten.
We'll go to the next slide. So this is our plan for our time together, and Kenya will introduce herself shortly. but we hope to really think about the experience of working with folks living with dementia in the midst of this challenging time. And the plan is to start with some sort of context setting about working with people with dementia, sort of in any setting, any time, crisis or no crisis, and then apply that to some specifics of this pocket of time, which is certainly a unique and challenging one. And then we'll wrap up with some questions. And I've already noticed that folks are thinking about the impact of COVID and the pandemic going forward. And I'd love to create a little space to consider that some more as well. Let's go to the next slide. So let's start with a check-in. I think it's important to acknowledge that you all are really critical, and your health and well-being is critical to the health and well-being of those with whom you work. So I want you to use that chat box to answer the question, how are you doing? And I see residents are really depressed, stressed, overwhelmed, exhausted, stressed, tired, struggling, overwhelmed, tired, hanging in, declining, overwhelmed, lonely, sad, lonely, stressed, confused, isolated, hanging in, a lot of stress, a lot of missing people, underwater, overwhelmed, trapped, working hard, missing people, frustrated. So yes, I think take a deep breath. You all have been going at this for months and you're doing really hard work. It's important to know how you're feeling and take steps to address that. This is a marathon, right? Not a sprint, and you are really in the midst of it. So grateful for your work and also really acknowledge how difficult this is. And I see a lot of stress, a lot of overwhelm, and also acknowledging, as much as we pay attention to the whole person of the elder, it's important for you to acknowledge your whole self and know that I suspect you're juggling children, you're juggling your own family caregiving, just the day-to-day stress and challenges of living in the midst of a pandemic that none of us have had practice with. So thank you for being here. Thank you for pausing, and I hope you're finding ways to take care of yourself. Let's go to the next slide. So as promised, Kenya and I are going to share a little of our own personal context, kind of the lenses that we bring to this conversation, to give you a sense for why we're here and where our perspectives come from. And I'm hoping that Kenya can start off by sharing a bit about herself and about her organization.
So good afternoon. My name is Kenya Bryant, and I am in the beautiful Northern Virginia area of like Alexandria, Virginia. I'm 12 miles from the capital, Washington, D.C. So I am the social service manager for the Hermitage, which is a nonprofit private pay organization. We have on our beautiful campus, we have our independent along with our assisted living, and we also have a 24-hour healthcare center. And we have that all on one campus. And I get to be that one social worker, that advocate, the one that really, I believe, has one of the best jobs, and that is being able to just come alongside our residents and our incredible team at the Hermitage to serve. I've been with the Hermitage for about 8.5 years. Can't believe that when I say that. I came to Northern Virginia way of the Rocky Mountains of Colorado Springs. I have 3 gentle giants. Those are my teenagers. I call them giants because my 16-year-old, who turned 16 yesterday, is about 6'3". My 14-year-old is coming up strong, to about like, he's about 6 feet tall. And then my daughter is our 17-year-old, believes she is the queen. I remind her often of really who is, but she's my 17-year-old. So I get to have fun at work, but I also get to have fun when I come home as I manage them. So the Hermitage, really, our mission is about enriching one's life's journey. And so I just really get the honor and the pleasure to be able to do that every day. So thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here with you all.
Thank you, Kenya. Kenya, I wonder if you could also share a little bit about the levels of living and where people with dementia live throughout the Hermitage.
So the Hermitage is unique. So with us having independent and assisted living in the healthcare center, our independent and assisted living actually are combined. It's almost like a mixed population. So that should tell you that we have dementia across the entire campus. So that's what makes it really unique. We don't have just one area. Our healthcare center actually is a residents with various disabilities or abilities, I'd like to say. So we do have quite a few that do have cognitive impairments. However, in our assisted living, we also have those who have cognitive impairment. Our campus, we do not have a locked dementia unit, so we don't have a designated unit. Our healthcare center does allow for us to kind of help with those who might want to wander a little bit more and love that elevator. We have kind of a system for that, but it's not a locked unit. So we have it across. So we're really that unique kind of campus, or all our friends may actually kind of deal with, various places of cognitive impairment throughout their journey. And that's kind of what we appreciate about the Hermitage, is that you can come in independent. You may need additional services from assisted living, and we go up to 3 different levels. And then it may come that life changes, as we all know, as we're on here talking about COVID-19 and everything, and how life has changed. And you may need additional service, which is our 24-hour nursing kind of care, and that's in our healthcare center. So we get to kind of walk alongside you through your life, truly enriching your life's journey.
Thank you. It's a really lovely description, and I appreciate the fact that it is unique to intentionally not have memory care and meet the needs of folks living with dementia across a continuum. But even if an organization has memory care, we know that folks living with dementia live in all settings, including homes. So thank you, Kenya. Thanks for being here. So I'll go to the next slide and tell you a little bit about leading age and about myself and sort of how I landed there. I think, like a lot of people in this field, it was personal experience that brought me into this space. I graduated from college with a plan to work in museums or art galleries, and or I was about to graduate from college, and my grandpa, who was my grandmother's caregiver, ended up very ill and in the intensive care for essentially a summer. And in that time, I spent a lot of time being a care partner for my grandma who was living with dementia. And as you all know who work in this field and can imagine, that was incredibly impactful. And suddenly my plan to work in an art museum or gallery just didn't resonate with me the same as it had prior to that personal experience of witnessing my grandma really struggle while her rock and care partner was needing a really high level of medical care. Ultimately, they moved into a community and have, of course, since passed away, or died, but that experience and their lives really continues to inform the way I think about this work. I went straight into the field of elder serving organizations after college and did not ever find a museum or art gallery to work in, though the arts continue to inform my work. The first job I applied for was a life enrichment or activities position, which I did not get, but obviously I really value that work and made my way into a position that was a good fit and spent some time in the provider world before ultimately moving to DC for a while and finding leading age. Many of you, I suspect, are members of Leading Age. We are a national association. Our members are all not-for-profit providers of elder services. They represent the entire continuum or spectrum of housing services and supports. And that includes affordable housing, home health, hospice, really sort of anything that's out there that helps meet the needs of older adults. Our members do it. As an association that's based in DC, we do education advocacy and applied research. I get to work on the education team, developing education content related to ageism, dementia, and holistic well-being. So I have an America Freed from Ageism up here because Leading Age adopted this vision a couple years ago and is fundamental to our work at Leading Age, and I'll talk more about that shortly. But that's just a little bit about both of our paths into this work and who we are. Like Kenya, I have kiddos at home too. Mine are not giants yet. They're 1.5 and 5.5. And if you hear them, you know why. Let's go to the next
Although
slide.
mine are teenagers, I'm going to just go ahead and preference that as well.
That's right. We're whole people, just like you all. Let's go to the next slide and shift to thinking really specifically about dementia. This is a framework that I think is ever evolving, but I'm hoping that it helps in the way we think about working with people with dementia. I've already added multiple circles to this Venn diagram over the years of working with it, and I suspect it will continue to change as we continue to learn more and change and the world changes around us. But I believe in this overlapping space in the middle is an approach to dementia that is inclusive, that centers the lived experience, and hopefully challenges us to think differently. So let's go to the next slide and think about person-directedness. Again, I've already heard this term multiple times this morning, so I know it is a familiar one to you all, but I don't think it hurts to spend a little more time thinking about it, and perhaps it's a slightly different angle. But I want to start by reading a definition of culture change, and this comes from the Pioneer Network. You'll get to hear from Penny Cook, who's the CEO of the Pioneer Network, during the next presentation. Culture change is the common name given to the national movement for the transformation of older adult services based on person-directed values and practices, where the voices of elders and those working with them are considered and respected. Core person-directed values are choice, dignity, respect, self-determination, and purposeful living. So the culture change movement, as you likely know, was initially envisioned to focus on nursing home level of care. But as the world has changed and our thinking has changed, it acknowledges that people live everywhere and can experience the trappings of an institution, even at home. So it really applies to any setting. From culture change, we've learned to literally put the person first when we're talking about people. We shift to emphasizing home over institutions. So we talk about people living in communities or homes versus facilities. We refer to individuals versus beds. 100 people live in our nursing home instead of a 100-bed nursing home. And nobody is labeled by their needs with terms like feeder or by their diagnosis like demented person. So let's go to the next slide. This is a quote from Brian LeBlanc, a friend and advocate living with dementia. I'm guessing some of you know him or have seen him speak. He's really quite remarkable. I think this illustrates person-directedness. He says, he's actually describing specifically working with folks amidst COVID. And he says, ask residents what they want to do. Give them options. Let them be a part of the planning because that gives them ownership. That gives them comfort. As always, people living with dementia have important insight to share. Brian's quote embodies the values and approach, and a lot of the recommendations and ideas of person-centeredness. He really acknowledges that people need to be a part of the solution, even in the midst of a crisis. So the next slide is an opportunity to look at anti-ageism, another one of those circles in that Venn diagram. And we're building this framework and considering how ageism shows up in working with folks with dementia. When Leading Age adopted our vision in America Freed from Ageism, we really declared a commitment to the anti-ageism movement. You're going to hear a terrific presentation from some advocates shortly about ageism and ableism, so I won't take long, but I certainly can't leave it out. This movement values the entire spectrum of the lived experience of aging. So that includes all of us, and it also includes people living with dementia. So we don't assume that older adults are frail or living with dementia, but if they are also included and valued parts of community. The next slide has a definition of ageism. There are many out there. I'm guessing that Ashton and Penny will share more with you. Dr. Robert Butler coined the term ageism in the 60s. He was really influenced by the other movements of the time. There are a wide range of manifestations of ageism, both individual, that kind of avoiding older adults, and institutional with things like housing and employment practices. When we're thinking about ageism, I think it's really important to understand that it applies to any group. So ageism shows up in the way we talk about millennials just as much as in terms like okay boomer or boomer remover, which are terms we're hearing amidst COVID-19. It's also really relevant thinking about that in settings like ours where there might be 18-year-olds working in the dining room all the way to a 103 or more year old living in your community. So the range of ages that are working and living in community really impacts the life of that community, and it can certainly be a strength, but one that should be, but also a challenge that should be acknowledged. The next slide has a quote from the Leading Age board chair and CEO of the Jewish home family, Carol Silver Elliott. And I'll read her full quote. It's from a recent article entitled "The Pursuit of Normalcy." Elders, by virtue of their age and the fact that they live in communal residential settings, have been deprived of choices of all sorts, including, but not limited to, the freedom of movement. They've had no input, no chance to express an opinion, no vote, just the imposition of rules that seem to come out of nowhere, rules that have an overwhelmingly significant impact on their lives. When did being physically fragile and requiring support become the standard by which you lose all rights? When did the need for safety override the need for quality of life? In all of this desire to protect, there is also an element of ageism. We'll come back to some of those questions that Carol posed later. Next slide. So as you can imagine, and as the next session indicates, the intersection of ageism and ableism is a potent one. They are powerfully intertwined and particularly relevant when we think about living with dementia. Many advocates believe that dementia should be seen as a disability rather than a disease. So if I think of dementia as an illness, for example, I might focus my attention on the medical aspects of the condition and how its symptoms can be fixed with medication. I might see people with dementia as, quote, patients on the road to inevitable decline and diminishment. With a shift toward a disability model, I start thinking about the Americans with Disabilities Act, the International Human Rights Treaty known as the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It helps to see that people living with dementia have hopes and dreams and want to learn and have talents and desire and a hope to keep growing. So many of you have likely heard Dr. Al Power, and he reminds us to ask, what are the cognitive ramps we need to be developing for folks living with dementia? And I invite you to consider also how the environment is actually creating disability for those living with dementia and other disabilities. I think Sarah Thomas's examples of changing the environment to address physical distancing requirements is a great way to start thinking about how we shift the environment to allow for folks' success. On the next slide, you'll see a definition of ableism. I'll give you a moment to read it. This one comes from Access Living. Again, there are so many possible definitions out there. So ableism is discrimination of and social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. On the next slide, you'll see a quote from another expert living with dementia. Her quote encapsulates person-centeredness and underscores the idea of seeing dementia as a disability. Miriam Marquez says, "We desperately need others to see our abilities and not simply focus on our inabilities. Please enable us, don't further disable us." So on the next slide, the final lens I want to think about is shifting towards some examples, and before we shift towards some examples of COVID specifically, is this idea of intersectionality, which I'm guessing that you all are coming across more and more. The next slide has a definition of that for you. It's from Merriam-Webster, and it is the intersectionality is the complex cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, such as racism, sexism, and classism, combine, overlap, or intersect, especially in the experience of marginalized individuals or groups. So for the purposes of this conversation, understanding the fact that each individual has intersecting identities and therefore experiences compounding forms of oppression is super important. So the lived experience of a Black woman living with dementia is very different than the lived experience of a white man who is gay and living with dementia. I think at the heart of person-centered care, and I've heard this already so many times, is to truly know the people with whom we work. So if we understand each individual's stories, we better understand the types of discrimination they have and are experiencing and how that's impacting their experience of living with dementia. So we also need to be mindful that folks living with dementia may not be able to express those experiences as folks who aren't living with dementia. So it makes it all the more critical for us to really know these stories. So I think it's important to stop for a moment here and acknowledge the moment in history that we find ourselves in. We are, of course, in the midst of COVID-19, but we're also in the midst of a time when our society is perhaps finally acknowledging the many layers of systemic racism. And Kenya and I were talking in anticipation for this presentation, and she shared that she's been thinking about ways in which to help residents sort of process and participate in this moment, especially for those residents who would find themselves protesting in the streets right now, but because of COVID-19 don't feel safe doing that. So I'm hoping Kenya might talk a bit about that.
Yes. Yeah, real passionate about this. So just thank you so much. Everything you shared, so good. I'm paying attention to you. I'm reading the comments, and there's just so much that is being said. So incredible participants with hearts for their residents, their clients, whatever they friends. I like to say our friends. And so I just love reading all of this. I will say that when we had our conversation, we were right there in the midst of really everything really kind of coming up. And I don't want to say just because I am 12 miles from the Capitol that we're like the only folks that are really feeling it, but we feel it really when you're so close to the heartbeat of what happens in our nation. And so have really felt it professionally, but felt it personally. And so I knew if I was feeling it, and then if I knew my my personal like group of people around me that I surround myself with are feeling it, then I knew our residents and our friends in our communities were feeling it as well. And I was reading in the comments that so often we feel that our residents and friends that have cognitive impairments don't have a voice to these things. And they absolutely do. They just may not know how exactly to verbalize it or what actions to take. But when we come alongside them, especially like you said, we are in the midst of like history right now with COVID-19, never experienced this. And then let's add on to it that there is this acknowledgement of racism that's been going on in this nation. It hits them in a greater way, I think, than it hits us, because they have lived through a lot of things that are surrounding this. And so I decided, how can I give them a voice? So the team at the Hermitage is incredible. Our resident services, our nursing team, actually we have really taken on a person first initiative. And so we say the extended family. So we have our maintenance department, housekeeping department, our engineers, they're extended family. So we're no longer the departments, we're the extension of our residents and friends' family. So all of us wanted to see how we could come alongside. And so we decided that if there were any team members who went out and did peaceful protests or rallies or marches or participated in any way, be that at home or they did get to get out in the streets, we wanted to share that with our residents. And we knew that the relationships we built with them, they would appreciate it. So we put together, we use Touchtown, which is our in-house channel. And with COVID-19, we know we all had to be creative. I'm reading the comments, everyone's like, how do we get back to doing this and being up close, and how do we touch our residents? We decided to use technology and touch them through Touchtown. And so we did that by putting together an incredible slideshow of pictures of their team, their friends who have put their voice to this matter. And we also said, we bring your voice and we bring your heart with us as we go. And we had so many residents say, yes, like, you know, yes, I'm out there because you're doing it. So we put the slideshow. We had our geriatric psychiatrist went out to the streets and he showed pictures. We had our director of nursing, her family, they went and we took those pictures. Me and my family went. We had all these pictures we put together with quotes. And then those team members who did not get the opportunity said, well, how do we get to have our voice? We want to be heard. So we had a photo shoot and they held up signs with messaging of where their heart was and where the heart of the Hermitage residents and the values that we stand on as well. And we took pictures and we put, again, another slideshow together. And then we partnered with our chaplain. And we have a chapel in our assisted living on the 5th floor. And we said, how can we create a space safely with COVID-19? Because we are allowing our residents to come out for exercise, for their social well-being. How do we create a space that they can come and they can see the pictures, they can take part, how can they express? So we decided we will have candles, and they're the electric candles. And we set up a space, we put we printed out the presentation. Our chaplain put a prayer of unity and racial justice together, and we blew it up for our residents to see, and we set it all up. And we have these candles, and we invite our residents, we invite our team members. You do have a voice in this, and you can come, you can light a candle, you can sit and meditate, pray, be quiet for a moment, because a lot of our residents said it was just overwhelming. COVID-19, and then whoa, a lot of us witnessed what we witnessed with George Floyd and all these other situations that happened, and it impacted them, and they needed a way to express. So that was our way of being creative to say, we hear you, we want you to be a part of it. We understand your stories of what you've lived through, and we want you to be a part of it. And so let's partner together in this and see how we can do it together. It was small, but we've heard that small little bit or little thing was a big thing for them. And it was a big thing for us.
So beautiful. And I'm seeing
Amazing.
all these comments in the chat box that everyone is really moved by. I was really taken by the fact that you said you were taking your heart with us. And then the ritual with the candles and that sense of being a part of something bigger is something that we all want, especially I think in a time like this. Thank you for sharing that, Kenya. That's just really
Thank you for the
lovely.
opportunity.
Let's go to the next slide and hear again from another expert of lived experience, really an expert in just so many ways. Brian Van Buren is another advocate that some of you may have come across. He is remarkable. He was a flight attendant, a psychologist. He has lived many, many lives and now finds himself advocating as he lives with dementia. He is a Black gay man who talks a lot about the intersection of those identities as someone who's living with dementia and has done a lot of work, specific advocacy in that space, which I'm really grateful for. As Brian notes here, Black folks have a significantly higher risk of being diagnosed with dementia. So this idea that dementia doesn't discriminate is not accurate. When we look at the social disparities of health, it's really important to acknowledge the realities. And certainly that shows up for COVID-19 as well. And Brian says, our risk is twice the overall population's, but I go to my many conferences and I see only a few Black faces. So really important points. And should you ever have an opportunity to hear either of the Brians speak, they're really, really remarkable and insightful folks. So on the next slide, we're gonna keep building on what Kenya shared in terms of thinking about the challenges that are specific to this moment, specific to COVID, specific in most cases to working with folks with dementia, and what are the ideas? And some of them will simply be reinforcement for the great work you're already doing. But based on what Kenya just shared, I know that there are also little nuggets and ahas for all of you as you continue to share and engage with each other in this community, which you all have been building. So we've explored person-directedness, anti-ageism, anti-ableism, and intersectionality. Hopefully you're thinking about that space right there in the middle, right? That space where we're empowering elders and supporting folks living with dementia as part of the community and part of the daily decision making. This is really important, even in the midst of a pandemic. A few things about working with folks with dementia, and we already talked about it. Folks living with dementia live everywhere. In some cases, the folks living with dementia don't even know they're living with dementia, right? So there's that. We also know that what's good for someone with dementia is often good for everyone. If we think about those, go back to those ramps and think about the way ramps, physical ramps, initially designed for folks living with disabilities, physical disabilities, changed life for everyone. Those of us who have pushed strollers down the street benefit daily, right, from those ramps. So what are the ways, what are the small adjustments that we make for folks living with dementia that actually make life better for everyone? So I think that's another way to work with people living with dementia. So here's a list. We brought together a group of folks, a group of providers to ask them, what's hard right now? What can we do to support you? And what are the solutions that you've already discovered? And Kenya was a part of that group of members. We heard from them, and I'm gonna invite Kenya to add to this list if I've forgotten anything, but we heard that PPE and physical distancing is particularly hard with people living with dementia. The masks can feel scary and confusing. People that rely on lip reading are suddenly losing that tool unless you buy clear masks, which are out there. And physical distancing often is just not terribly realistic for someone living with dementia who perhaps doesn't understand the why, perhaps does, but it's more complicated, right? Social isolation and further cognitive decline is something we're all really worried about. And I know we have provider members who already believe that they are witnessing that to some degree. Supporting families is really hard. Families miss seeing and hugging their family members and are struggling with their own guilt and feelings. That's something you all deal with already, but it's amplified, right? Maintaining person-centeredness and relationship-centeredness amidst a crisis. I think we heard, Kenya and I, when we were together with that group back in April, I heard some folks saying, I don't feel great about the way we're doing things right now because we're fighting fires. So as we have a little bit more space, and I realize not everyone does yet, what are the ways we can reflect and sort of ground ourselves in person-centered values going forward, mindful that we may find ourselves in a second wave in the not so distant future. Testing is traumatic. Especially for folks living with dementia, it can be very traumatic. It's an uncomfortable process for anyone, but that can be a real challenge. And now here we are in the midst of reopening for some people, and how do we manage that transition? Kenya, does this list still resonate? Is there anything missing?
Oh, it does. No, it resonates. And I'm reading all of the comments, and they are seeing the challenges very much. I feel you, and my heart for you goes out, because I have had to be very creative. Our team has been very creative in overcoming these challenges right here. So yeah, thank you so much for, we put it out there so that everyone knows we're all on the same page.
Yes.
We're all trying to breathe through this and find creative ways. And I would just want to say, this might just be my personality and just who I am. And Kristen, you got to know that as we got to talking, but I often see challenges as opportunities. And I'm not saying it ever is going to be easy, but all of these challenges, we can definitely look as opportunities for us to dig a little deeper, because if we're honest, COVID-19 and then us facing the fact that we need to acknowledge racism, all of that right now has made us be creative, innovative, and it's made us look at opportunities now. Like, how can we come together with our team and be really, really, really innovative? And how do we, with the PPE and the physical distancing, how do we hear their voice of our residents who say, I don't even know, I had our residents start off saying, I don't even know what you're talking about when you say social distance. What does that mean? And really being able to say, well, that's true. They probably don't understand. We just keep saying it and throwing it out there, and no one really understands it. And those with dementia really are like, I don't even get what you're saying. So it's really having to step into their shoes and now really get creative, really think about person-centeredness and what social isolation and what it felt like to us. I was reading the comments. It hurt us to have to be told, stay home. It really affected our residents and our family members, and how do we come alongside them and make sure that in COVID-19 and all that is currently happening, that they feel supported, like truly, like, let me call you, let me let you have a moment to vent. Let me let you know we're here for you as well. Makes them feel like, I'm seen, and it's not, okay, it's not just me that I feel it. So I think you're right. All of this are challenges, but they also create opportunities for us to be very creative and innovative with our friends and residents. And probably some areas we really needed to, if we're honest, we really needed to change some things.
I appreciate that, Kenya. And I think it's hard to stay positive amidst such a challenging time. So I really appreciate that you managed to do that. I've seen a number of ideas related to the mask challenge, and knowing that is a particular challenge for folks living with dementia, but also folks with hearing loss, struggling to follow conversations when they don't have that cue of the face to watch, and just the muffling that occurs with a mask. We do have one member of the Jewish home family has been decorating their PPE, and staff had a fashion show to sort of lighten things. And I saw some very creative decorations. A lot of you are talking about putting smiley faces, wearing your picture on your name badge so people see your whole face even while part of it is covered under the mask. But there are certainly some creative approaches, and the reality is it remains a challenge as well. And certainly Leading Age is doing tons of advocacy, but we know that just getting the PPE is a challenge in itself. But once you have it, how are you keeping things as positive as possible and making it doable as possible for folks living with dementia to continue to engage and connect and understand. The social isolation and further cognitive decline piece, I think, is where the thought of being intentional about engagement comes in. Kenya, you talked a little bit about in-house TV, but I wonder if you could talk a little more about how you all have used technology and TV to support folks living with dementia at the Hermitage.
Sure. So just like everyone, again, reading these comments and seeing, yeah, we have the challenges of how do you manage to keep engaging your residents, engaging your families, keep the connectiveness that really our residents with dementia needed. So we used our in-house channel. Our resident service team just got really creative, and we just began to put everything we could think of on that channel that would give them the experience that they were having when they were able to be face-to-face with our team. And so some of that was we did funny videos from the team members. I mean, and when I said the extended family came together, and we would say messages, personal messages to our residents, letting them know from every department how we cared for them, we were thinking of them, we were still here. We had actually team members dress up and do little skits and perform on the channels and just bring something light and fun. We asked residents, we said, we want you to own this. This is hard, but how can you give your voice? So we had residents, and we still do have residents today. We had one that he reads stories, and we will take his audio and pair it with pictures, and he reads a story to his neighbors and his friends, and that's his way of being able to participate. And we had other residents who decided that they wanted to share messaging out to their neighbors and their friends. And we also used the same platform of recording. We created a recording studio. We changed one of our spaces that could no longer be necessarily utilized during COVID-19. And so we said, well, let's make it into a video studio and a photo studio. And we invited residents. We would clean and, of course, sanitize. We invited residents to come, and they did messages to their loved ones, to their grandchildren, to their kids, to their friends out there. And we would email them out to their loved one and friends just to let them know they were thinking of them. We utilize FaceTime and Zoom, especially in our 24-hour nursing center, because again, there's various abilities. So a lot we're not able to maybe possibly get up and out and going. And so we wanted to make sure that they still felt connected. So those nurses, with everything else going on, still would bring iPads into the rooms and set up FaceTime, set up Zoom calls, make sure that the residents were calling their loved ones, making sure there was that connection. Our chaplain, she would call and do FaceTime and Zoom with residents. And we even took advantage of the phone. We came up with a communication task force, and we just said, here's this group of individuals on the team, and we're gonna call residents and we're gonna call families almost every day. We're just gonna give them a voice and let them know that, hey, we care, we're here. How can we help you? What is it that we can do for you? And that task force has been very helpful to, you know, any questions or concerns they had, or they were just afraid or lonely. We were able to kind of utilize the phone and do things that way. We created kind of a visitor vista where our residents and family members could see each other. We set up like couches in a beautiful garden area, and then we set up our outside area where families could see their loved ones, because with dementia, it was really hard sometimes with that Zoom or over the phone. So if we could, we would bring them into this space where their loved one, they could see them through the window, be able to put their hand up there if they needed to, and talk to their loved one. We found that helped a lot with our residents with dementia. They really needed that. And then some of our residents decided that they wanted to support them by sending notes and letters to their friends and neighbors. We had a garden club that decided they wanted to put flowers together from the garden, and they'd be delivered to residents, just a little bit of outside coming inside. So it was their way of bringing. One of our residents that's over the garden club says this was his bringing sunshine into the rooms of his friends and neighbors. So that's just some of the things that we got creative. Did it always work? No. I mean, like bingo, we do bingo over our touchdown and then the phone, and if you won, we deliver. And we're trying to be as creative as we can, but we thought, let's take advantage of technology. Let's see how we can show our faces and give our voices and help as much as we could through this. It helped us too, because we missed them. We missed our residents.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I really appreciate especially the idea of finding ways that residents can be giving back within the community and connecting. Yes. I think that's so important and special. We've heard other examples of certainly children and community members writing a ton of letters. I saw one of our members manage to get so many letters that they could deliver one note a day for, I think it was 4 weeks, to all the residents. So they elicited that many volunteer letters that came, and then were able to deliver those to elders in the community. I'm guessing that Ann Basting in her presentation this afternoon will talk to you about how she has used postcards to prompt creative engagement for folks. But there's something about, you know, Charles, earlier you mentioned going back to basics, and there's something about going back to these basics of telephone and mail, imagine, stamps and everything that really can be special and impactful, and in some ways kind of unique. So I think there's something to that approach. One other member, I thought this was sweet, and I'm sure many of you have done this, but managed to coordinate a visit of baby animals around Easter time in their courtyard. So we certainly know that animals are really important to folks. And I heard that mentioned earlier, Sarah mentioning the number of folks have new puppies these days, but how can we bring in the element of sort of surprise and delight into a life that is feeling a little bit rote lately for maybe just for me, but I think for all of us, there's a lot of rhythm that's very consistent. The idea of supporting families, and I saw a question in the question box about how can we engage families to do memory boxes and share ideas. Certainly, I think many of us have worked with families to develop those memory boxes. This is a time where giving families jobs is really, you know, can be really important and address that sense of guilt that they may be carrying with them. I know some family members are rallying to support staff right now, finding ways to feed staff, finding ways to, you know, put their energy in that direction, and that then lifts up the entire community. So I know one of our members has posted a list of ways families can support the community and connect with their family member living within community. That might be, you know, a really simple way to send family members to a spot where they get a sense for ways they can meaningfully connect rather than, you know, the same FaceTime call, which can be quite delightful, but maybe there's more more depth to be had. Again, we've talked quite a bit about person-centeredness, but just that challenge of maintaining that. I know some of our groups have added team huddles when they weren't doing them before at the beginning of the day. Maybe this is the time to start bringing in that culture change approach to your community as a way to build community and talk about resident strengths and how to engage residents. And I know our time is nearly up, but I wonder, Kenya, because I think this testing as trauma piece, you talked about going through testing in your community. Do you have any nuggets of wisdom as people think about supporting elders with dementia through the testing process?
Again, we communicated so much. I mean, I think we might have over communicated, but we made sure on our touch tab, we delivered letters. Our director of nursing and assisted living in the healthcare center would go to every room with their nurses and say, we want to remind you, tomorrow we're going to have testing and this is what it's going to, you know, be, that this is who's going to come. We also had, our first round was an interesting one because we had National Guard there. So you can imagine what that looked like. And so we wanted to prepare them for that. So we had incredible CNAs who knew their residents. So because they knew them, that CNA went with that team. It was like we had teams go to the rooms, and we do that every time. There's like a team. There's never one person. There's always 2 or 3 people who go together that know the resident. So they're able to be able to, one of our team members, she would kneel right in front of them and just talk them through it. Another one would kneel to the side and she'd whisper in their ear as they were having the testing done. So we had to be creative, and that trying to, for the social distancing, we just had to be covered from head to toe in PPE so that we could support them, because there were some that they needed you right there. As many of them described their brain being tickled. You know, they were like, that was an experience for them. And afterwards, we made sure that the team would go and visit them. Our director of nursing made sure that those residents still had someone else that would pass by, check in. How are you doing? How was everything? You okay? We know that that was different, so that we could just make sure that they didn't feel like we came in, we did this test, we leave, and now let you figure it out on your own. We wanted to make sure they just felt really supported. And it doesn't hurt, I will tell you, to be creative and partner with your dining team and your resident service team. Make sure it's going to be a dynamic meal that's coming, like a special treat. Like have a special treat that's coming on testing day, before and after, just to give them that daily pleasure, you know, maybe find out what they like, and it be something fun. And then resident services having something, even through your in-house TV, something really, really meaningful and fun, because it is an experience. I've been tested, so it's definitely an experience. And it does take you off guard for a while, for a couple hours. So our residents, you know, really are feeling it, especially those with cognitive impairment. So give them a little treat afterwards as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that level of intention for sure. So as we wrap up our time together, I just want to move through these last few slides. On the next slide, you'll just see the themes that emerged as we talked about working with folks with dementia. I've heard creativity with a small c and a capital C. So creativity as in the arts, and also creativity in terms of just really creative problem solving, person-centeredness, directedness, and of course, communication, as Kenya mentioned. I don't think you can over communicate, especially now. So these are some questions to leave you with, some questions to ponder as you continue to move through these presentations today and your work going on. I think that we have a unique chance, and Kenya referenced this earlier, and I've heard Charles say it today already, to use the pandemic as an opportunity for reflection and change. This sucks. But what are the bright spots? What are the ways that we can shift the field and see change that maybe wasn't going to happen before? We've certainly seen it with technology, but what are the other ways? So the first question is, COVID-19 is very contagious, so we segregate to avoid and cohort to avoid spread. But why do we segregate people living with dementia? On the next slide, the next question is the one I shared from Carol Silver Elliott, our board chair. When does the need for safety override the need for quality of life? This is a question that we've all been asking about, this balance of autonomy and choice and safety, but the pandemic is shining quite an intense light on it. So how does that impact the way we think about our work? And the next slide is just what I was talking about. What have we learned? I've heard John talked about the use of technology and the interdisciplinary approach. Sarah talked a lot about social interaction and purposeful engagement. Lisa, how activity departments are implementing individualized quality programming in a different way. So what are the ways, what are the things that we want to hold on to after we move past this crisis? And then final question for you is, how do we center the voice of the lived experience, particularly in crisis? It's hard to be in the midst of a crisis mode, but what about the elders? They, Kenya said this earlier, they have lived through more than we have. So how can we build on those nuggets of wisdom and let them inform and encourage them informing our decision making? So we'll skip to the last slide and just say thank you for the work you do every day. You certainly make a huge difference in the lives of elders, and we are all part of this community trying to make life better. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Kirsten, for your sharing your deep expertise. I'm curious to know who rejected your application, life enrichment.
It's a leading age member.
Yeah, but thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Kenya. I want to take the time to thank you for essentially two things. One is sharing your expertise and your experience, but also thanking you for what you do, which is engaging the older adults. And with that, you know, like Kirsten did, take a moment to thank everyone on the line that does such essential work in the quality of life of our elders. Thank you. Yeah, so that was your last slide, Kirsten. Well, thanks so much. We're going to move on to the next section. And to do that, I am going to stop the recording. Oh, and we'll share Kirsten's and Kenya's presentation today as a follow-up as well. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
So let me stop the recording.